This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self.
Hey everyone, it is Rosie. I think that you're going to find a lot of insights out of this conversation that I had with Neill Marshall and Kurt Mosley from Health Search Partners. While they predominantly place CEOs in health systems, this is a conversation for all industries. This is a conversation for all levels of leadership, whether you're a formal leader or not. And obviously, those of you who are listening who happen to have a formal leadership role, if you happen to work in healthcare, if you happen to be a CEO, there's going to be some additional things you want to pay attention to. But really, this is a universal conversation. And throughout the work that they've done, they have interviewed over 10,000 healthcare executives. Just that's mind boggling. And they start to see patterns in their work. And they have really come to learn that the first 90 days in someone's tenure is super critical. And I think we intuitively know that, but they share so many great stories of when it is done well and some things that would be surprising. And you're like, oh my gosh, wouldn't even think of that. They share some of the biggest missteps and what we can learn from them so we can avoid them. Tons and tons of great stories, first of all. And they have what they call the 90-day series where they really want to be collecting more stories. And so if this resonates for you, please make sure you check the show notes and that you help them out because their work is really, really important. And just some of the things you're going to want to listen for. This might be an episode you're going to take some notes, but Kurt talks about something he learned about the 25-50-25 principle and kind of how that plays out. He talks a lot about the difference between being a quick versus a hurried leader and why that distinction is so important. In fact, I made him repeat it because it's kind of one of those mic drop things. One of the things that Neill talks about is how important it is to listen for the whispers. And there's a motto that came up throughout the whole conversation about that we can't talk ourselves out of something we behaved ourselves into. So there's a lot of good common sense things in here. There's a lot of great things that you can apply in a formal and an informal leadership if you are looking for a job, if you're new in a job, as you think about transitioning, or even if you've been in a role for a while and you want to kind of hit a reset, or you have new team members coming in. This is really just, there's a lot of ways you can apply this. I would love to hear what opens up for you from this conversation. Take a listen. Kurt and Neill, I am very excited. It's been a while since I've had joint guests on the show, and I'm excited to have what I think is a really important conversation around leadership, around the employment experience, and just how we set everybody up for success. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, most of us have heard, that you only have one chance to make a first impression, and we know how important that is. And I think we hear so much in today's day and age, particularly with younger generations, but not only in the workforce, of being like, oh, peace out. Like I get to a job and this is not what I was sold in the job interview. This is not what I expected. And I don't have any tolerance for it. And I'm gone. And so I use all that to talk about that. You both are very, very passionate, and your work is really looking at those first 90 days and how critical they are. So let's just start with how this niche, if you will, came to be and how this started to become an area of interest and focus for you and why it's so important.
Frankly, we stumbled into it. We both do executive search, and we were interviewing a hospital CEO, and he told us about a tactic that he was using in his first 90 days of any assignment. And I remember thinking, that's significant. I mean, really significant. I mean, I've interviewed 10,000 hospital executives. So why have I never heard anything like that before? And I started questioning why more of the people I interviewed never mentioned a first 90-day plan. So we started doing our research. We've placed leaders in healthcare for decades. And what struck us is how many careers and organizations are made or broken in those first 3 months. We kept hearing from CEOs that their first 90 days weren't about getting their footing. They were to set the tone for everything that followed, all the trust building, cultural alignment, all the credibility. So that's why we launched the first 90-day series, is to capture those stories and give future leaders a playbook. And what we want is we want CEOs and people to be intentional about their first 90 days. Decide the tone that you're going to set, the symbolic actions you're going to take, and the relationships that you're going to focus on, and the wins that you're going to get early on.
And I would say because the show up as a leader, and we believe that everybody has an opportunity, and I would actually be so bold as to say a responsibility to choose to show up as a leader in their life, regardless of title or role. For people who have that formal leadership role, it is even more critical as you focus on because of the influence that they have over culture, over the employee experience, et cetera. And so I think that this is so critical. And so often, instead, what I see is they come in those first 90 days and they're trying to prove themselves rather than be intentional about the tone they're setting, the relationships, the connection, and everything that influences that culture. It's, I got to prove myself. I got to whatever it is. And it's not helpful. So I love that you stumbled upon it. I think that's where all great things come from, is either we had a horrific experience that we want to remedy so others don't go through it, or we stumble upon it on accident. And I just think that's fabulous. So you said you've interviewed 10,000 executives, which is an astounding number. I love that data set. You talk about these tactics, and why haven't we heard this before? What are some of those tactics or stories that you've learned that people really should take to heart? And whether they're in their first 90 days or not, like, what are some of the things that are really critical to set us up for success?
Yeah, and I've got a couple that I'd like to talk about, and then Kurt will have a couple that he likes to talk about. So the first one I like to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Richard Parks. He was the CEO of a large 22 hospital system in West Texas. So I was talking to him, and he said, "Well, Neill," he said, "whenever I start a new job, Mama stays home with the kids, sells the house, and moves. And I go to my place and I move into the hospital." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, Richard. Everybody works hard their first 90 days." And he goes, "No, Neill, I move into the hospital." Most big hospitals have residence dorms where the residents live. And he moved into the residence dorm. And he said his first night in Lubbock, spent the night there, woke up, and like all of us old people do, first thing he did when he woke up is he asked the residents there, "Hey, how did you sleep?" And they said, one of them popped in and said, "It was crappy. The mattresses are horrible." And he said, "I can fix that." And he called the VP of facilities and he said, "Get 5 trucks. We're going to Costco and we're going to get all new mattresses for the residents dorm." And he said, on his last day in Lubbock, 7 years later, he said they were still talking about that and the things that he learned by literally living in the hospital. And as I said, that's what got us started. I hearken back to my very first job out of college. Worked for a Ferguson Enterprises. It was a plumbing wholesale, and they had fired our CEO, and we got a new CEO. And we were called trainees. All the trainees were looking out the window when Grover came for his first day. And Grover drove in the parking lot and he got out and he walked through the parking lot and he picked up trash. And every single one of us saw that. And I will guarantee you that there wasn't a single day after that that Grover picked up a single piece of trash. And he never said a word about it. Picked up the trash, walked in, put it in the trash can, and then came in and introduced himself. But that was the last day that every single one of us got there before Grover, and we picked up the trash. So it was a symbolic act. The other thing that he did is we had a bullpen, and we were all answering phones. We were inside salespeople. And one day he was walking by, and the phone was ringing. Grover didn't say, "Guys, pick up the phone." Picked up the phone. "Hi, Grover Martin. How can I help you?" And he took the order. Well, from then, and again, never said a word, handed us the order and walked out. But that was the last time Grover ever answered the phone, because if he was walking through and the phone rang, guys were jumping over desks to pick up the phone first.
I love it. So before you share stories, Kurt, because there's so much in that I love on so many levels. So one, just the mattress thing. I think that so often we hear this in other industries, the coffee sucks. Or, it's some of these that are really low-hanging fruit that are huge sources of frustration. And, obviously with residents, if they're getting crappy sleep, I mean, hello, they're taking care of your patients. It's life and death. In other industries, it may not be as life and death, but you hear that the biggest gripe is people are like, can't they fork over, an extra dollar to get good coffee? This stuff sucks type of thing. And what it does is it sends a message of whether or not you're valued and you matter when it comes to some of these things that might seem seemingly small. So what I love about what that new CEO did is it's looking at, hey, there's a small thing. Can we fix it? And, not all problems are that fixable that quickly, right? There's like the quick, low hanging fruit that we should be listening to, whether we're the CEO or not, right? Whatever level we're at the organization, like, do I have the opportunity to influence or fix this? There's mid-range stuff that takes a little bit longer and a little bit more work, and then there's the longer term that has to go on a roadmap and there's complexity and stuff to it. But I think so often we don't listen to the people closest to the work, or we brush off because, oh, they're just fill in the blank. We label it. They're annoying or they're crabby or they're never going to be happy. But a lot of times that stuff is a symptom of other stuff. So one, I think that that's such a great example. And for the people who are listening, whether you are an actual CEO or whatever level you are, I think it's taking the lessons from, are you willing to lean in? Like I think about in the hospitality industry, you watch, whether it's the bar manager or the restaurant manager and things are getting busy and they're diving in and they're bar backing and they're it's not, I'm up here in an ivory tower. I'm here to support my team in whatever way makes sense. And I'm not better than or above it. We're in this together. And I just think that's a really powerful message. And when you're brand new, when you are at that CEO level, holy moly, yeah, that sets the tone of, I'm not above you. It's just, we need to be working on stuff. And is this the best use of the CEO's time? Probably not, but they're willing to do it.
And Grover picked up the trash, literally never said a word. And this is 1984. So it's been 40 years and I still remember it.
It left its mark. That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for that, Neill. Kurt, let's hear from you.
A couple that I really like sharing. Dan Castillo, he was the former CEO at LA County USC Medical Center. And in his first 90 days, he began rounding, as all CEOs do. And everybody, that's the key. That's how you get to know people. But he didn't do it just during business hours, but he did it in the middle of the night. I mean, staff weren't expecting him at 2 a.m. when he showed up, but that's the point. He went in there, he just said he didn't want to say, I'm just invested in the team. I'm invested in the people that rarely see me and what happens at night. And he showed it. And his actions really built trust faster than any internal newsletter ever could about, here I am, I'm here to change things. So his actions, and my father said this, and I always like to requote it. My father had a lot of sayings growing up, as fathers do. But he said, you can't talk your way out of something you behaved yourself into. Let me say that again. You can't talk your way out of something you behaved yourself into. And Dan Castillo's behavior really showed what he was meant from day one and what he felt about the hospital and how he cared. Because County USC, I mean, their business it's 24/7 in healthcare, as we all know. Another gentleman I like to talk about, Jim Necker, he wrote a book. It's a great book. It's called Reviving the Heart of Healthcare Leadership. And he shared with me, he said, well, Kurt, what I did in the first 90 days when I'm going through everything, talking to everybody, he says, I used the 25, 50, 25 rule. I go, okay. And I tried to look that up and it wasn't anywhere. And I thought, okay, this is something he created. I said, tell me a little bit more about it. He said, well, when you get there, he said, 25% of the people are going to be on board from day one because you're the CEO. They're going to follow you. 50% are going to be on the fence. 25%, he said, it's not that you don't want to care about them, but they're not going to be on your side. So he said, I think win the middle is what he said. He said, get those people in the middle and move them over. And Neill talked about, what a lot of these CEOs did right. One of the big things, and what Jim talks about in his book, he said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, he showed up to impress everybody in their first board meeting. I think it was Dunkin' Donuts just opened up. So he brought Dunkin' Donuts to everybody and he laid out a spread and he was all ready and standing up there. And there were some rumblings and he was like, I don't know what's going on. Well, little did he know, and it's just something he's new. The local bakery had done the donuts for the board meetings for the last 20 years. So he offended everybody in the room by picking the wrong donuts.
Oh, the horror.
Yeah. So he said, take advantage of a good crisis. And he came back and said, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was what it was. It won't happen again. And everybody really afterwards just said, that's way to eat crow and get back online. So again, his advice was don't waste energy on the resistors and 25% in the middle. And he said do things right from day one. But he said also understand culture at the hospital. Even culture even has to do with donuts.
I love that. Well, and as you're talking, really what he's describing is the law of diffusion of innovation. And we've talked about this because we specialize in equipping leaders and teams to better navigate change and disruption. And so when you think about, any kind of tipping point or a mass adoption of a new idea, of a process, of an idea, of a technology, whatever it is, you think about that bell-shaped curve. If that front of the curve is the, early adopters, innovators, which is around that 25% or so, the middle are the early and late majority, and the end are the laggards or the skeptics. And so often, especially I'm going to say in healthcare, but you'll see this people who work in the wellness and well-being industry, there's this vernacular of how do we quote unquote get the hard to reach, and we focus on the people on that other tail, right? The people that they're loud many times and they're very vocal, but they're not the majority. And we're so focused on how to convert them and win them. And it's a battle that isn't helpful. You gain momentum by building that mass. So I love that he said focus on the middle. So when people are thinking about systems changes and culture changes and whatnot, so often we don't remember or care for the messiness of how humans show up in the face of change. We think, oh, we're going to use, all of these change management methodologies and all these other things, and they should just work, and they wonder why they don't. So anyway, I love that he had very sage advice at a very young age. And I also love even the donut example. I think we're going to make mistakes all the time. And whether we've been there 90 days or, 9 years or beyond. And what I love that CEO did is it's the eating crow. It's being willing to be human and be vulnerable and say, I made a mistake, because that also sets the tone for psychological safety for the rest of his group. Thank you for sharing those. So as you've had these interviews and you've talked to all of these leaders, tremendous insights. And again, I'm going to say for everyone listening, whether or not you work in healthcare, a lot of these are applicable across industry. This just happens to be your niche, right? So with all of these interviews, what are some of the common patterns or common behaviors or practices that you've learned that have helped people be successful, that other people can learn from who are listening?
I think that the common patterns, the things that we are urging people to focus on is really being intentional when you're starting a new position, right? Don't just act like it's a new job and just walk in and just start doing. I mean, really think through, who do you want to be? What is the brand that you want people to talk about? Again, setting tone with symbolic acts. You don't have to say everything. Sometimes an action speaks much louder.
Like the picking up the phone or picking up the trash or something, right?
That's my favorite one, right? Going for those early wins that you talked about. Really get a win. And actually, I've had CEOs negotiate with boards before they go in about the wins that they're going to get. Okay. During the interview process, they've come up with 2 or 3 things. They feel like that they can make a change early on, get a win, whether it's for the physicians or whether it's for the employees or whether it's for the executive team, right? Get a win and negotiate it up front. Look, bosses, board, here's what I want to do, but I'm going to need X number of dollars, or I'm going to need your support, or I'm going to need this. Let's get that and knowledge and know what it is up front. The other one is, don't attack culture until I say attack, but don't go after culture until you truly understand it. If you do it too early, you may end up breaking it rather than enhancing it.
It reminds me of the late great Dr. Edgar Schein always said the worst way to change culture is to go about changing the culture. Right. I mean, like you said, don't fix it. The best way to change culture is to actually focus on the underlying mindsets, kind of our inner operating system and behavior. So I just share that of whether it's your first 90 days or not, trying to, as your words, attack culture is the worst way to go about any kind of transformation. So there we go.
Yeah. And especially doing it too early before you truly understand, because you're not going to understand the culture the first day you walk in the door. Visibility, be visible. right? I mean, be visible and then spend time with the most important stakeholders, both internal and external. And did you have some to add, Kurt?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that a lot of the leaders that assume these roles that we place them in, I mean, they've been successful up to this time, but there's a book out there that really kind of, I think I read it about a year ago, but it was called What Got You Here is Not Going to Get You There. And some of the leaders that go in and say, listen, this is going to be very different. You know, I was a CEO for 15 years or 10 years, but this is a complete different situation. So instead of me going in and resting on my laurels, there's a hesitancy to get things done awful quick because they want quick results. But at the same time, understand from a standpoint of what am I going to have to change what I did from the past? This is a complete different situation I'm in now. Even if it's the same job title, it's completely different. So I think that's very important to go in there and reevaluate and say, how am I going to be different than I was from my last job, as opposed to coming in. And we all hate this. And everybody on the call, I'm sure the same thing when they go, well, at my last job, we did this. They don't care because it's their job now and you're part of their job. And I think it's important to understand that. And John Wooden said it very well. He was a UCLA basketball coach, but he said, especially when a new person coming in, he said, be quick, but don't hurry. It basically means in that first 90 days, understanding the quick wins that you can do, but don't hurry getting it or don't listen first. I mean, do listen first. Don't just go in and act. And again, a lot of it has to do with making timely, purposeful decisions as opposed to just making a decision to do it in the first 90 days.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that because I think about one healthcare system that we worked with, and this is a couple CEOs ago, but there was an interim CEO. It happens often in various systems, but there was a CEO that was very fear-based, and so they got rid of that, and they needed someone to be interim, and so they took somebody from the board. And as happens in so many industries, you have different outside directors on the board because they bring various perspectives. So they had this business owner that happened to be a retail well-known shoe company, and so brings the business lens, which you need on a board. And I think there was some really good intention, but he kept referring to here's how they do it in that business and lost credibility with the physicians, especially. They're like, if I hear one more thing about the damn shoe company or whatever. And so all of those past experiences that we have inform, but I've even seen individual contributor coming in on a team. And there's something about bringing a fresh perspective from a different organization that is invaluable, and people need to be willing to listen to it. But when they constantly default to, well, this is how we did it here, this is how we did it there, this is how we did it there, it starts to either feel like you're putting down the new organization. It can start to come across, perhaps unintendedly, as judging the way things are versus like, hey, I have a different experience, but I'm also open to how you do things. And so I've seen any level within an organization, people coming in when they change roles, that is a kryptonite that puts people off versus like, hey, I have this fresh perspective because I'm relying too heavily on what I did before, recognizing, yep, this is a new organization, but I can bring that experience and that insight to help bring something fresh and new. But I also have to be learning what works here and tell me about why you do it this way. And, oh, that makes sense versus assuming that they need to change it or assuming it doesn't work.
Going back to that comment, quick leaders have a plan. They think things through and they have to get things done quickly, but they understand that. But hurried leaders make mistakes and they skip steps. They're just trying to get something done. And it's really important to understand that because a lot of times you can make a misstep in that first 90 days and it'll haunt you the rest of your career.
I love that distinction between quick versus hurried leaders. I think that's good. Will you say that again? Because I think that's like a little bit of a mic drop moment that we have to think about.
Quick leaders have a plan. They prepare, they prioritize, and they execute with intention. And hurried leaders, they skip steps sometimes and they react instead of responding. So they're on the defensive. And they often cause confusion in that first 90 days. There's two things you don't want to be. You don't want to be invisible and you don't want to be confusing.
I think the key word in that hurry that you said is reactive. Intentionality is going to win every day of the week. Reactivity rarely serves us or others well, but it's so easy to get caught up in that if we're not grounded, if we don't have practices in place. So love that. So let's talk about then, and again, so everyone is listening, these are universally applicable beyond healthcare. And these are also, I would say, applicable as I'm listening to both of you, well beyond just the CEO and the executive suite. I mean, we do a lot of work with CEOs. We do a lot of work with executive teams, but we also do a lot of work at the team-based level. And I think what you're talking about are universal principles as it relates to culture and universal principles as it relates to kind of human beings and what we need to be effective and what we need to be collaborative. So I just want to like double emphasize that because I think it's so critical. So you guys obviously, besides your own interviews and research, like me, you dig into the research and you look at what else is out there. And so there has been work out there that has talked about how emphasizing building relationships outside the organization, not just within, we've talked a lot about within, but why is it also important to build relationships outside of the organization in those first 90 days to set us up for success? And what does that look like?
Healthcare leaders don't operate in a vacuum. And I always say this, I'm very lucky I get to speak nationally on a bunch of topics, but I always look at the audience and say, when I come out, I don't say I'm on the left side or the right side. I'm on the patient side because we're all going to be patients one day if we aren't currently. So the success of those CEOs in the first 90 days depends on physicians, community leaders, regulators, donors. I mean, some of the people on the hospital foundation board that are funding money for a linear accelerator, that it's very important for this hospital to achieve their medical mission, which a lot of times is keeping afloat. And leaders that get outside the four walls early, meeting like mayors, pastors, competitors even, and partners, they get this perspective and credibility right away. There's a book out there. It's called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. When we go back and if you need a favor for somebody, you need somebody to step in for you or offer advice, make sure you open those lines of communication before you have to say, well, I'm really in trouble. Or you could go to them and say, mentor me before I step into this. And one CEO told us his best move was visiting every local church and civic group in the first 90 days. And it built that community trust before he even launched his first 90-day initiative. So they were on board before he even came out and said what we're going to do.
I love so many things about that. And as I think about, regardless of industry, like you think about most organizations, there should be ties to the community, whether it's, you're working with local schools, whether you're looking at internships, whether it's giving back to the community. You're right. We don't operate within a bubble, and that people want to feel part of something. They want to feel connected to something, including the people who work within those organizations. And so I think healthcare is one, education is one, but I even think about, I have a friend who's the owner of a small business that is light manufacturing, and how they need to be involved with not just their suppliers or whatnot, but elsewhere in the community. And you think about just even your brand and your word of mouth. And if we're just here we do our thing and we happen to have, if you have a brick and mortar building, we happen to have a building in this location and take up space and pay taxes versus what are the relationships that you are building, whatever that is, with your local schools, with your local fellow businesses, your competitors, all the above. So I love that because I think we do get so tunnel vision focused on this entity or this organization or this group of people, but it doesn't exist in an ecosystem by itself. So it's all interconnected. I love that.
And usually, Rosie, in these middle to small communities, the hospital or the school board or the independent school district are the two biggest employers in the town. So that old shampoo commercial, tell two friends, tell two friends, tell two friends, the word gets out.
Yep. So we've talked a lot about what are like key things in your first 90 days to think about to set you up for success, whether you're a CEO or not. Obviously, in your 10,000 plus interviews, you've also learned about some of the missteps. And I love talking about missteps because, let's be honest, as human beings, we learn as much, if not more, from our screw ups and our miss-ups as we do from the things that go well. And so talk to me about what are some of the common missteps that you see leaders consistently make in those first 90 days, and how can others learn from that so they can hopefully avoid it?
So I'm going to go back to something I said before, which was walking in without a plan, not being intentional in the tone that you're setting, and just starting a new job, right? We just feel like that really, really thinking and deciding on a plan, and then, obviously executing the plan, being reactionary. So I'll give an example. Had a CEO that I knew that went into an organization and discovered that one of the people that reported to him here in the South, we call it jihad, didn't jihad with this person. And he decided to let him go. Well, what he did, he did very little, getting very little prior knowledge about this person. And what he didn't know was that this person was one of the most popular people in the whole organization. And it cost the CEO their position. Instead of really delving into it and really kind of figuring out and discovering, they were reactionary and it cost them their job.
Well, and it is interesting. I mean, right, going in seeking to understand and, not being reactionary. It can be so easy to do that. It's funny when you talk about going in and learning, I think back, this was obviously before I started Saleo Partners. Many, many years ago, I was working for an organization. We were the consulting arm of the business. And I knew from the interview process going in. So I was going in at the time as an individual contributor. Eventually, I was in a leadership role, but I was not coming in as a leader, like a formal leader. I was coming in as a consultant and expertise to help their client. And I knew from the interview process that the previous person didn't work out. And so I asked a boatload of questions, not just about their culture, because I had previously been in a toxic work environment and I didn't want to repeat it. So I peppered them with questions about their culture left and right to understand what it was like. But then I also had asked about, well, what didn't work about this previous person, like without giving it up, but like, what is it you're looking for this time around that you didn't feel like you got? Like, what are the parameters for success for this role? Because there's clearly something, and they didn't even have it fully defined. They just knew what didn't work. So we're kind of building off of that. And so I think I spent probably, my first week, if not my first 2 weeks, that I got a key list of stakeholders and who were the different people internally, the salespeople, the different leaders of the different parts of the organization that interacted a lot with this role that are going to be critical to this role's success. And they weren't necessarily part of the interview process. And I went and I had one-on-ones with all of them to introduce myself, but to talk about what are they looking for from this role? What do they need if they think this role is successful in meeting their needs and meeting the client's needs? And they were like, wow, I can't believe somebody did that. And in my mind, I'm like, isn't that common sense? Because it was a huge promotion for me at the time to get this role. I'm like, I don't want to screw this up, and clearly they have an idea of what doesn't work. And that person was let go. So I don't want to repeat history. And there's just something so like simple. So I think about anybody coming in, like when I led teams at other organizations, again, before I started Saleo Partners, part of their onboarding is I would make sure, besides the welcoming, is I would make a list of people of here's who they are and here's who I want you to meet with. And here's the relationship why I think it'd be important to meet with them. And here's kind of priority of who you should meet with first, because relationships are a key part of it. And so I think if people are listening that are a formal people leader, think about what is your onboarding plan for people to be intentional about who do you want them to meet and build relationships and why. And really, those of you that are listening that might be looking for a job, be thinking about how do you go and not just into that interview process, but your own onboarding process to not just jump in and do the work, because that's so easy to do and it misses so much. So I just love that. Kurt, how about you? What are some of the biggest mistakes and missteps that you've learned that people can hopefully not repeat?
Well, I think it's a simple one, not listening, but a real life example. It's kind of a humorous story, but a new CEO was talking to his support guide or his mentor when he got to the hospital. And he said, what do you want to do your first day? And he said, morale equals maple syrup. And the person goes, don't you want to do rounds first? He said, no, I'm cooking pancakes for the whole staff. So he set up outside where the hospital entrance for the nurses, the doctors, all the support staff. Started at 6 a.m., had 3 griddles. He had this apron on. It said, Flippin' Awesome CEO. And
did he have a chef hat on? Did he have a chef hat?
Yeah. And when he walked by, first of all, one of the doctors said, is this a fundraiser? And he said, no, I'm the new CEO. The nurses were scared. Security was alerted. The grill caught on fire. So from day one, everything didn't go to a plan. And then he looked back afterwards when they're cleaning up the catastrophe, if you will. He looked back at his mentor, and he said, how about doing rounds tomorrow? And he said, that's a good idea. So it didn't work. And it was something obviously he thought was going to work. But from day one, like you said, really tread lightly, because again, you're new there. And then I think kind of piggyback on what Neill said, for people coming in and just getting a lay of the land at the very start, coming in and issuing memos from day one when you really don't know, who will be the recipients, how are they going to take it, and just wade into the water. Don't jump in the deep end, because you never know how deep it is and if you can get out of it.
Yeah, one other thing that I want to add, it's very easy to listen when you're being shouted at, right? Everybody hears the loud stuff, but you also need to listen to the whispers. Okay. So we had one CEO that I know that the chairman of the board started making little suggestions. And the suggestions were very quiet and very subtle. But after we added up all the suggestions, they were really, really loud. And he wasn't listening.
Well, that's powerful. And when we do coaching with leaders and executives, one of the things that we always talk about, and we talk about this in workshops too, and we talk about listening, because listening is such a skill that is lacking in our society, period. We don't tend to listen to understand. We listen to reply. We listen to get our words out, and we're not really fostering that connection and understanding. And I bring that up because when we are teaching different ways of listening, we talk about not just listening for the words that people say, but listening for those spaces in between, listening for the energy or where there's lack thereof, really that full intent listening. You learn so much more than just the words coming out of someone's mouth or how loud or how whispering they are. And what reminds me as you're saying all this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Chapman, but he's the CEO of a company called Barry Wehmiller, and I think he got Inc.'s like number 3 CEO in the world a couple of years ago, and McKinsey and Harvard have studied him because he's on this mission to teach truly human leadership. And they're in the manufacturing industry, and they buy up struggling manufacturing companies in various markets. And it's not about ripping them apart. He talks about it's actually infusing care and love back into them because they're the lifeblood of a community. And anyway, when I first met him, he was actually going to be out in town in Minneapolis area for one of their locations. And he invited me to sit in on one of his listening sessions. So as the CEO, one of the things that he had to practice, he just moved to chairman of the board and his son took over as CEO. But one of the practices that he had was he would go to every single location. And at the time they had 90 something. Now they have, into the mid 100s, but he would literally go to each location and he would have a listening session with a group of about 15 to 20 employees. And they were always curated. It wasn't just event session. There was a topic for the listening session, whatever it might be. It could have been about the mattresses or, whatever. So it doesn't become a recreational complaining session. But I watched him sit there and he had somebody who was taking notes so that he could just focus and be present and listen. And, he'd tell me more, say more. And he wasn't there to defend. He wasn't there to excuse. He was there to take in their perspectives, their listening. And there's a reason why they're studied for their great culture and how they go about everything of like, wow. And they use that law of diffusion of innovation of you focus on people and you love them and you care about them and you don't give energy to the people on the tail end. So, I share all that because powerful leaders, when they say they're powerful communicators or effective communicators, it starts with listening. And how do you go about doing that? And how do you show up with listening? Are you willing to take in feedback? But also the strength of your listening is everything. So anyway, I share that story about Bob because he's such an amazing human being, but it really speaks to what you've been learning about those first 90 days as well of we learned so much more. What is it the saying that, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and only one mouth. So with that, there's something else as we're talking about all this, because you're talking about setting the tone. And there have been this saying, and probably still a lot of people have this, that culture starts at the top and it starts with the CEO. And I will say that from my experience, that is true to a point, but culture ultimately resides at the local team level. So if you have multiple locations or even multiple teams in an organization, culture sits at that team level with every leader of that team influencing. So you can have a large organization, you can have a pocket that has amazing culture and people love working there. And another part of the organization, you feel like, what company do you work for? Because they hate it, right? So culture there's many, many subcultures. I'm curious of what is your experience when you think about culture? How do you two view it? And what have you seen in the work you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of people say culture is dead, just because of, I don't know if it's COVID or whatever, but there was a time when culture was on the main page of everybody's communication lines, if you will. But I really think that if you don't understand the culture from the start, you're doomed to fail. And it's an important part of it. In healthcare, new CEOs, they don't usually stumble because they lack technical skills. They stumble because they misread the culture from day one. That's why in our first 90 days, what we talked about earlier, Richard Park sleeping in the hospital, replacing the mattresses, walking the parking lot with Neill's first boss. They're symbolic actions. They're not these bold emails they send out or these visionaries. They're symbolic actions that help shape culture, and people remember it. I mean, I think it's the most important. And again, culture is just a multiplier, Rosie. If you goof up one thing, you can do 10 things right. But if it's a 10 times culture, you can sort of negate all those good 10 things because the culture was misread. And a lot of people, when they say they misread the culture, it offends people because their culture is their reality.
So if people didn't gather, and we've said this in the intro already, but part of the whole stumbling upon this critical aspect of the first 90 days is you obviously have this 90-day series. Tell us a little bit about that and talk about what's next for you both.
We've just completed a new series. Most of your listeners probably are not going to, it's not going to be relevant to most of them, but it's on what we call the search committee interview or the panel interview. And so we did a 7-part series on kind of the do's and don'ts. But the last piece of that series was on doing a mock search committee interview. And, the reality is you can do a mock interview, whether it's in a search committee interview or in a regular interview. And we just realize and just really believe that doing mock interviews can be so valuable, especially if you have people who will tell you the truth about how you're coming across and the answers you're giving and the whole persona of what you're giving. So we've just finished that. We've released that over the last couple of months. And then the one that's kind of near and dear to my heart that we're working on right now is what we're calling mentorship in the YouTube age. And does it still matter to have a mentor? Back when Kurt and I started in business, you learned from other people because that was the only way to learn, right? Today, frankly, my son was taking my Suburban up to Colorado, and I had chains, and I said, "Do you want me to show you how to put the chains on the car?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, you know how to do it?" He said, "No, but if I get up there and I need them, I'll just YouTube it." And it really, it seems like a small thing, but it really had an impact on me, right? So do young people think that they don't need mentors because YouTube and Google and Chat GPT can teach them everything they need to know? Spoiler alert, they do need mentors.
Well, we can learn a lot. I mean, I'll go to YouTube or Google, like, tell me about this. But if you look at all of the data on particularly the term that we use in the work that we do that I can't take credit for, but I've gleamed onto it because I love it, of looking at the generational differences. They talk about native analogs versus native digitals. And native analogs are really millennials and older. And even though millennials did not grow up knowing a world without internet and cell phones, they did not get smartphones or social media until they were well beyond those formative years. So they had to learn how to interact with human beings. And so when you look at native digitals, it's basically Gen Z and everyone beyond, and it profoundly shapes the way we relate to human beings, but also our relationship with technology. And so the reason that I share that, you talk about in the YouTube age, what the research is finding is that the native digitals, while they are very tech savvy and in general more open to change than the native analogs, they actually are looking for mentorship. They are looking for that because it's all been through a screen. They are actually looking for that human interaction. There's just a need to maybe build some skills of how to do that, and they want to be mentored.
The statement that got me as I was interviewing somebody in talking about mentorship and building relationships, right? Is this person stopped and he said, "Look, YouTube has never called and offered me a job, and my mentors have."
Very good point. Well, so speaking of, I'm just going to call our humanness. One of the things that I gave you both a heads up about, that in the work that we do, and as we've analyzed leadership data, I've just recognized that there's this common thread, whether someone is a CEO or just starting out in their career or anything in between, that it is in our human DNA to get into the self-protective mode. And when we're in that mode, we tell ourselves stories that help us feel safe, but keep us small and keep us from having the impact that we want to have. So I like to normalize the messiness of being human and have all of my guests, even though you are both well qualified and experienced individuals, you're human beings first. So I don't care who goes first, but I would love you both to share what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can show up as a leader in your life and have the impact that you want to have?
Well, I think repeating from earlier part of the podcast, what my father told me about you can't talk your way out of something you behave yourself into. And there's many things that I've done in my life. And I always think, especially if people are asking for advice or I'm doing a speech in the Q&A afterwards, because that's really important. A lot of times you're great on your Q&A, but I always want to make sure whatever my behavior is the same way I'm talking to make sure that, that people look up to me that from a standpoint of if I walk the walk, I can talk the talk. So those are what my father always instilled with me. And he said also treat everybody with equal admiration and being courteous to them because you never know when they might come back in life and be a part of your life or help you down the career or they need you down the career and you can be there to help them. So I think, like I said, most importantly, my father told me, he said, do leadership. And that's what I've been, my whole life. He said, you're on stage every day and don't forget it.
I love that he taught you those lessons. That's amazing. And I'm going to pry a little bit because then with that, I call it head trash, but is there then within that a self-limiting story? Like sometimes when you're up there, is it, oh my gosh, like I messed this up or they're not going to believe me or what, I guess with that, trying to live your father's lessons, is there a self-limiting story or a narrative, or again, I call it head trash that sometimes creeps in that you have to recognize and kind of wrestle with, so to speak?
Temper. That was one of the big things. I remember I was a big baseball player growing up and well into college. And I remember that in my high school years, I had a temper tantrum. I thought I was safe and I was thrown out. And after the game, my father came in the locker room, pulled me out and said, you're sitting out the rest of the season. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I'm one of the stars of the team, but I sat out the rest of the season. When I got home, all my baseball equipment was locked in the closet. And so that was what I learned. Because again, at that time, I couldn't talk my way out of my behavior, and my father wanted me to make a lesson with me, and it stuck with me the rest of my life. So just little things you do every day, a 30-second behavior, something you say can haunt you, as we all know.
Yeah. Thank you, Kurt. Neill, how about you? What's a self-limiting story you still tell yourself?
I am into the big, not the small. By that, I mean, I've always wanted to be the person that if somebody is in crisis, that I'm one of their first 3 calls. I got this from, a long history. But if you are in a crisis, I'm the person that can help you, right? But there's another piece, and that is the day-to-day niceties that, frankly, I'm not as good at. And I didn't recognize that you can do both. You don't just get to be the hero in the big things. You can also be the hero in the small things. And that's something that I've had to learn and have to work on.
I appreciate that because, there was a saying, it's the little things or whatever that matter. And I think, yeah, if you have a narrative that, the big stuff is what matters and the small stuff doesn't, you can neglect it.
Right. And my nature is to focus on the big. Maybe I wasn't as nice on some day-to-day things, right? But when you really needed me, I was there. But the reality is if you focus on it, you could do both.
It's kind of like you talked about that story earlier about the whispers. Are you focusing on the whispers versus being loud? Yeah. So are you both ready for quick questions?
I don't know. Well, we're not quick, but go ahead.
That's okay. That's all right. So whoever's ready can just jump in first and then we'll put it to the other person. So fill in the blank. Living authentically is
being human.
Harder for me.
I love it. Thank you for that. Thank you for that humanness. I love it. See, Kurt said it's human and you're being human by saying it's hard.
Oh, I was.
I love it. I love it. Okay. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do?
Show up. You just do it.
Be like Nike, just do it. Kurt, how about you?
I think it's, what was I forget what the quote was, but half the problem is showing up, as Neill said, is being there. And then understanding, even in those first, when you show up, when you're put on the spot, you have to make a decision, but don't fret about your decision. I always used to tell employees, you can question any decision I make, but the problem is I have to make that decision. So you can question why I made that decision, but don't ever question the right I have to make my decision, because it's my responsibility.
There you go. There you go. All right. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
Well, on this podcast that I'm 6'9".
Holy cannoli.
See, Rosie's surprised. That I could answer. I can't be authentic, but I can answer that, Rosie.
Well, you can't tell when someone's through a screen and are sitting down. So there we go.
I can't tell you how many people that I've met through screen. When they meet me in person, they're like, holy cannoli.
I love it. Kurt, how about you?
I think a lot of it is, as I speak across the country, people always say, how do you remember everything? Where are your notes? And I always say, it's almost like I have a projector in my head, but what I'm going to say when I'm presenting. And people don't know that. And at the same time, people say, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, one good thing about being a speaker, they never know what you're supposed to say. They're never going to say you missed that point on the slide or that one PowerPoint. So people always say it looks natural, but anytime you're in front of people, it's like playing baseball. You're in front of the whole audience. So
yeah, preparation is your friend. As someone who does a lot of public speaking, absolutely. All right. What's your favorite go-to song?
Mine changes daily. Today, it's Born on the Bayou, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
A Day in Life by the Beatles.
Okay. Nice. Okay. I like it. What is something that you can't live without?
Well, my family.
Same here, my family, but I ride a road bike every day, 20 miles. I can't. I had a minor procedure, nothing big, just I had to get something removed from my leg, and I haven't been able to do it for the last 2 weeks, and I've realized I can't live without it. So exercise.
There you go. Sometimes that happens. So I have a road bike, and I used to be on a racing team once upon a time and stuff. So I love it. Yeah, I love it. So there we go. If we ever get to meet in person, we'll go out riding. So
I'd love to.
Okay. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
I love walking my dog.
What kind of dog do you have?
A little Bichon, but we walk a couple of times a day and listen to Creedence Clearwater Revival, and just the people in the neighborhood laugh because I sing most of the time.
Nice. I love it. Kurt, how about you?
I think it's just very lucky that my grandchildren's school allows you to eat lunch with them, and I every week or every other week I get to eat lunch with them. I get to see them in their environment, their habitat. I get to see how they're learning, and at the same time, I learn more about who they are as people.
I love that. Oh my goodness, that makes my heart happy. Okay, and what are you both grateful for right now?
My health, very lucky.
I've got a brand new grandson, and the first one. Right? There is something about grandchildren. The reason that grandparents are goo-goo over them is because they are.
And you can give them back. You don't have to do all the hard stuff anymore.
I now get it.
Oh, nice. Well, one closing question for both of you. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
Mine would be intentional. Have a plan. Be intentional. Create a positive brand. Decide who you want to be, and then go be him or her.
I love that. That's my word of the year, is intentional, by the way. So love that. Kurt, what would you challenge leaders to do?
To understand what really matters in their first 90 days when they go to a job, and have their decisions, the signals they send, the actions that shape the culture and credibility, and really understand that first 90 days is not necessarily onboarding period. It's the foundation leaders build on for years to come. And it's your track record. It's your legacy.
Well put. Well, this has been so fun. Thank you both for spending time with me. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom and insights from, good golly, 10,000 plus leaders that we can all learn from, and just really looking forward to what's next. Much, much gratitude to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Enjoyed it very much.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.